Once the pride of every Aussie driveway, Holden wasn't just a car, it was a national icon. But how did Australia's beloved lion roar so loudly, only to fall silent forever? Today, we uncover the rise and the heartbreaking fall of Holden, a story of ambition, loyalty, and betrayal that shook a nation. The ups. It all began with leather, horse saddles, and the dust of Adelaide's gold rush streets. Australia's most iconic car brand didn't roar onto the scene with engines and steel, but with stitching and craftsmanship. That was Holden in its earliest incarnation, a small family business shaping the ride of a nation long before it shaped its roads. And yet even then, the vision was clear. The future wasn't in saddles or harnesses, it was on wheels. By the early 1900s, the world was moving fast. Machines were replacing muscle, transport was being transformed, and the motorcar was no longer a novelty. It was destiny. Holden saw the opportunity where others clung to the past. By 1913, the company was building sidecar bodies, combining practicality with innovation. By 1924, Holden had become the exclusive Australian bodybuilder for General Motors, cementing a relationship that would define the nation's automotive story. This was not merely a business deal, it was the beginning of a partnership that would intertwine with Australian identity for generations. General Motors recognised the talent, and in 1931, they formally acquired the company, creating General Motors Holdens Limited. Suddenly, Holden had the backing of one of the world's largest industrial giants, and the stage was set for something extraordinary. Production shifted to Fisherman's Bend in Melbourne in 1936. The factory was more than bricks and machinery. It was a symbol of ambition. And soon, Holden would prove it could respond to more than just commercial opportunity. When World War II erupted, the company pivoted almost overnight, manufacturing military hardware and essential machinery. Australians watched as Holden transitioned from car bodies to critical components of the war effort. The company became part of the national fabric, proving that it could adapt, endure, and excel when it mattered most. But it was the post-war years that would truly define Holden. Lawrence Hartnett, GMH's managing director, envisioned a bold and uniquely Australian idea. A car built for Australians, not for American roads or European streets. Rough terrain, long distances, the hot sun, and tight budgets. This would be a car that could survive the realities of the continent. Even though Hartnett was pushed aside just before its launch, his vision shaped a revolution in mobility and culture. On 29 November 1948, the first Holden rolled off the line at Fisherman's Bend, the 48-215, affectionately known as the FX. Prime Minister Ben Chifley looked on and offered one of his rare smiles. Australians understood immediately that this was more than a machine. It was a promise, a car made for the nation. The FX was smart, practical, and tough. It had enough speed to cover the vast distances between cities, fuel efficiency to keep family budgets in check, and the durability to endure roads that were often little more than tracks. In testing, it even outperformed the Chevrolet models that GM used as benchmarks. This wasn't an imitation. It was a car made for Australia by Australians, and it quickly became legend. Holden didn't just stop at building a reliable car. Its design was clever, tailored to local tastes and practicalities. Families, tradespeople, and city drivers found something familiar in its curves, proportions, and engineering. By the 1950s, Holden was exporting to 17 countries, a remarkable achievement for a young company in a far-flung corner of the world. Australians weren't just buying cars, they were expressing pride in a national product. Holden had become part of the identity of a growing, self-assured country. The 1960s brought the EJ and EH models, which represented Holden's first major modernisation. Sleeker, more contemporary, these models responded directly to competition from Ford, which had begun building stylish, modern vehicles locally. Australians responded, Holden was no longer just practical, it was aspirational. It was a reflection of a country that was maturing, growing more confident in its industrial and cultural capabilities. 1968 saw the birth of the Kingswood, a car that would become synonymous with suburban Australia. It was a family car, a workhorse, a weekend road trip companion, and a symbol of achievement. By now, Japanese automakers were entering the market with their small, efficient cars. But Holden remained the dominant force. The HQ series, built from 1971 to 1974, became Holden's most successful model ever, with nearly 500,000 cars sold. Even in the face of growing international competition, Holden retained its place at the top. It wasn't just about cars. Holden and Ford created something uniquely Australian. Tribal loyalty? People didn't just pick a brand, they chose sides. Schoolyards, pubs and workplaces became arenas of passionate debate. Ford or Holden? It was a choice that defined identity, and behind the scenes, motorsport elevated these rivalries to legendary status. Drivers like Peter Brocky, became national heroes. Bathurst became a proving ground, not just for cars, but for character, courage, and skill. Holden wasn't merely a machine, it was part of the national mythology. Throughout the late 1970s, Holden evolved again. The Kingswood gave way to the Commodore, a car that brought modern engineering, more responsive handling, and greater performance. Australians could finally enjoy a large, rear-wheel drive sedan that felt sophisticated yet familiar. It was a car that could carry the family, handle long distances, and still thrill behind the wheel. For decades, the Commodore was the backbone of Australian roads. Holden's success wasn't accidental. It was built on careful attention to local needs, a willingness to innovate, and a boldness to dream bigger than any other company in the nation. Australians trusted Holden because it understood them. It was reliable, accessible, and proud, traits Australians valued deeply. Every new model reflected not just technical improvement, but cultural awareness. The roads, the climate, the lifestyle, and even the aspirations of those who drove them. By the end of the 1970s, Holden had transcended the role of car maker. It was now a cultural institution. From city streets to outback highways, from family driveways to holiday campsites, Holden cars were everywhere. Families grew up with them. Tradies depended on them. Students learned to drive in them. Holden didn't just build cars, it built generations of memories. Through the 1980s and 1990s, Holden refined its models, enhancing performance, safety, and style. The Commodore evolved again and again, staying competitive with a world market that was becoming increasingly crowded. By this stage, Holden was more than a company. It was a symbol of Australian ingenuity and pride, a living connection between citizens and the machines they trusted every day. And it wasn't only cars. Holden had become a part of lifestyle. It sponsored sports, supported communities, and became an integral part of the Australian story. Its factories weren't just workplaces, they were centres of learning, skill, and culture. Engineers and designers honed their craft, mechanics built reputations, and families relied on Holden for livelihoods. Holden's story in this era is one of determination, vision, and national pride. From a small Adelaide saddlery to an industrial powerhouse with global reach, it demonstrated that Australia could compete on the world stage. The FX, the EJ, the Kingswood, the HQ, and the Commodore all became milestones in a narrative larger than any single car. By the end of the 20th century, Holden was firmly embedded in the Australian psyche. Its cars were not just vehicles. They were part of the landscape, part of the culture, and part of what it meant to be Australian. Families talked about their Holdens like they were members of the family. Petrol stations, streets, and garages became full of yellow, red, and blue cars. each one a testament to the brand's enduring popularity. And so, Holden's rise wasn't just about clever engineering or smart business. It was about timing, vision, and connection. It was about understanding the country it served, listening to the people it relied upon, and daring to dream big. It became more than a car company. It became a national icon, a symbol of ingenuity, pride, and Australian spirit. Holden's story of ascent is a reminder of what happens when talent meets opportunity and when vision meets courage. From the leather saddles of Adelaide to the streets of every city and the highways of every state, Holden's legacy is one of innovation, perseverance, and deep national significance. Australia didn't just adopt Holden, it grew up with it. It celebrated it. It trusted it. And in doing so, it made Holden not just a car brand, but a chapter in the story of the nation itself. The Downs. The roar that once echoed through Australian streets had faded. The once proud lion, Holden, that had carried generations of Australians across highways, suburbs, and outback tracks, was now walking toward a quiet, inevitable end. But the death of Holden was not sudden. It didn't come with a single dramatic announcement or a catastrophic failure. No, it was far more insidious, creeping into boardrooms, showrooms, and factory floors over a decade or more. It was a slow decline, shaped by politics, product planning, consumer trends, technology, and decisions made thousands of miles away. The rot began in earnest in 2013, when the Australian federal government, after years of debate, refused to extend financial support to local car makers. This was not just a budgetary decision, it was a cultural earthquake. Holden, Toyota and Ford had relied on government assistance for decades to stay competitive in a global market dominated by massive international conglomerates. Once the announcement was made, the trajectory was clear. Australia's car-making era was over. All three local manufacturers signalled that they would transition to import-only operations. The writing was on the wall, but for Holden, the fall was still only beginning. By the end of 2016, both Toyota and Ford had ceased local production entirely. Holden, stubborn and sentimental, held on the longest, a lion refusing to leave its den. But finally, on the 20th of October 2017, the conveyor belt stopped forever at the Elizabeth plant in South Australia. The announcement was met with sadness, disbelief, and a sense of collective loss. For Australians, it wasn't just a factory closing, it was an end to a symbol of national pride. The reasons for Holden's demise were many and intertwined. First, consumer tastes had changed. The Australians who once proudly drove big sedans and station wagons now wanted SUVs, crossovers, and compact cars. Holden's only attempt at a locally produced SUV was the Adventurer, a vehicle that failed to capture the imagination or the wallet of the public. Australians weren't buying it. They were turning to imported SUVs from Japan, South Korea, and the United States. The family driveway, once dominated by Commodores and Kingswoods, now saw CR-Vs, RAV4s and Tucson models rolling in. Holden's market relevance was slipping. Meanwhile, the global automotive industry was undergoing a revolution. Hybrids, electric vehicles, and advanced fuel-saving technologies became standard expectations. But Holden, as a subsidiary of conservative US-based General Motors, lagged behind. There were no hybrids, no electric vehicles. While brands in Europe, Japan, and even China were testing, launching, and perfecting next-generation drivetrains, Holden was still relying on traditional petrol engines. For Australians shopping for forward-looking, environmentally conscious vehicles, Holden wasn't even on the radar. Its brand identity, once synonymous with durability and trust, now felt stale, out of sync with the world. The final, fatal blow, however, came from a corporate decision made far from Adelaide, Sydney, or Melbourne, GM announced that it would abandon the production of right-hand drive vehicles in all its factories. This decision was purely financial. Left-hand drive vehicles accounted for roughly 75% of GM's global production, and it cost the same to engineer right-hand drive cars as left-hand drive. From GM's perspective, the numbers didn't add up. From Holden's perspective, the ground had vanished beneath their paws. Without a source of right-hand drive vehicles, Holden could no longer legally sell cars in Australia. Production lines, sales plans, and decades of local engineering expertise suddenly became irrelevant. Add to that the cumulative effect of decades of cautious product planning. Holden's vehicles, once tough, reliable, and perfectly suited to Australian conditions, had grown conservative. Incremental updates replaced bold innovation. Commodores became comfortable but predictable. Consumers no longer associated the brand with excitement or forward-thinking technology. And while competitors imported vehicles designed for global markets, Holden's offerings felt like echoes of an older era. The economic reality was just as cruel. Manufacturing in Australia had become increasingly expensive. Labour, compliance and infrastructure costs made it nearly impossible to compete with imports from countries with lower production costs. Holden's factories were efficient, but efficiency couldn't overcome the structural disadvantage of producing cars domestically in the 21st century. The die was cast long before the Elizabeth plant closed, and then there was the emotional side, the heartbreak of a nation witnessing the disappearance of an icon. Families who had bought Holdens for generations, whose children had learned to drive on Commodores, who had taken road trips and holidays in Kingswoods, were suddenly told it was over. There was sadness, but also disbelief. How could a car that had been so central to Australian life vanish? How could a company that had survived wars, economic depressions, and global competition be undone by politics, shifting tastes, and distant boardroom decisions? By October 2017, Holden's final car rolled off the production line. The plant was emptied. Conveyor belts, once filled with workers and engines, stood silent. Tools, jigs, and machines were dismantled or shipped overseas. The factory, a symbol of local craftsmanship and pride, became a relic overnight. Employees, many of whom had dedicated decades of their lives to Holden, faced redundancy. Their experience, their loyalty, their expertise were suddenly footnotes in a story dominated by global corporate economics. The closure marked more than the end of production. It was the end of an era. Holden had been woven into the cultural fabric of Australia for nearly 7 decades. It had been more than cars. It was identity, pride, and community. Football teams, social clubs, and workplaces had lived in Holden's shadow. Australians had chosen Holden as much for what it represented as for what it delivered. Losing it felt like losing a part of the national story. Even today, years after the Elizabeth plant closed, the effects are still felt. The Australian automotive landscape has transformed, with imported vehicles dominating roads and showrooms. Holden exists now only as a brand, a logo on imported cars, a memory of something uniquely Australian. And while some Australians continue to purchase Holdens, it is with nostalgia rather than pride. For many, the lion no longer roars. It is a whisper of what once was. Ultimately, the fall of Holden is a cautionary tale of what happens when national pride, industrial capability, and global economics collide. There is no single villain, no one decision or misstep that alone ended Holden. It was politics, consumer behaviour, global trends, corporate conservatism, and structural economic realities all coming together. A perfect storm. Holden's decline teaches us about vulnerability. Even the strongest brands, even icons, can fall when the world changes faster than their capacity to adapt. It reminds Australians that no institution, no matter how central to culture, is immune from the forces of globalisation, technology, and policy. The end of Holden is also a deeply human story. Thousands of employees lost their livelihoods. Communities lost local pride and identity. The roar of manufacturing, which had echoed for decades, fell silent. And yet in that silence, the memory of Holden remains powerful. It is a reminder of what Australians can achieve when vision meets ambition, and also of how fragile even the most beloved institutions can be in the face of global forces. So when Australians look back at Holden, it is not just about cars, sales or factories. It is about heritage, identity, and a chapter of industrial history that cannot be replaced. The Downs of Holden are not merely a business story. They are a national story, a reflection of ambition, resilience, and ultimately, the realities of a connected world. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Holden's story, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling us your favourite Holden memory. We'd love to hear from you.